I wanted to briefly discuss Hipaa as it applies to EMS. This is not going to be any sort of in-depth review of Hipaa or count as any sort of specific training, but mainly just used for my EMT students to get familiar with the idea. So Hipaa came about because at one point in time it was very difficult for us to get our own personal medical records. I can remember several times going to the doctor saying, "Hey, I'd like to get a copy of this," and they would say no. I'm like, "But it's my records, my information," and they would say no. Every once in a while someone would, and they would copy it for you and charge you for it. And that's still legal, but at least now they have to give you your medical records. They can't say no. And that's good. But along with this came privacy issues, privacy laws, and that's where Hipaa most applies to us in EMS. So one of the things we have to be very careful about with dealing with any patient is that we don't talk about the patient to anyone who is not involved in their patient care. So first responders can talk with the ambulance crews can talk with the nurses, and physicians at the emergency department. We're all involved in taking care of that patient. But if it was a crew that wasn't on the scene, then they can't get information about that patient. Now we can also go backwards. So if you are at the emergency department and you find out something about the patient that answers something, and the first responders or EMTs on scene would benefit from that information, you can then go ahead and share that with them as long as it was those that were involved in the patient care. We can also use some of this information as long as we sort of strip out the identifiers, which would be things like names, social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers. As long as we strip out that information, we can use this to talk about in class and use them as kind of case studies. So you'll see that oftentimes we present a case in class, and it probably is related to a call that one of us ran at some point in time, but you'll never be able to tell who that was. So we have to be careful who we talk to about what we see, what we do, and information about the patient. And I think where most of us, at least in this area, run into problems with this is we'll run a call, we'll go back to the station, there's another crew there, maybe we're picking up times or paperwork or some supplies or something, and they'll be like, "Hey, what'd you run? What was that?" And then we'll talk about it. Well, that's technically not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to share that information. Now we can in general maybe, but making sure not to say anything about the patient specifically. And I think our regulars, those that we get called to on a regular basis, we probably violate that the most, because we like to talk about how many times we have to pick up Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, and how many times we have to pick up Polly this week, and what was wrong with her last time, and we'll share this information, and that's a violation of HIPAA. So you have to be careful not to talk about those sorts of things outside of those that were involved in the patient care. When you go to work for an ambulance service, your ambulance service will provide you further training on this. There is usually a person assigned that will be your HIPAA compliant officer, and they're the ones that you go to if you have any questions about this. Probably one of your supervisors, but make sure you know who that person is. Your service should also have a person that they can contact, public information officer. So if someone requests information, wants information from you about a call or a specific situation, you direct them to that person. It is best just not to talk to anyone outside of EMS about anything EMS, at least specific to a call. Don't talk to the media, just let your public information officer handle that. Another area or something that we're going to have to do is when we get the patient to the hospital, and we don't normally bother with this before we transport, but at the emergency department, we always want to get the patient's signature. And the signature does a few things. One, it will release or allow us to bill on their insurance, so release the insurance information so that we can bill on that. And the other thing it does is it acknowledges that they're receiving a copy of our Privacy Act, our privacy policies. So somewhere in that form, you should be giving them a copy of the EMS services privacy policies. Nobody ever really reads it, but if they wanted to, they could. And you are getting their signature saying that you have given it to them, and that then covers you under HIPAA. So again, you have a public information officer, and that's the only one that should really be dealing with the media or any request for any information about a call. Make sure you are not sharing any information about a call that could be related to a specific person, like a name, phone number, address, social security number. And sometimes if it's a smaller community, even big events, like if we had a shooting in our area, that's probably going to make the news. We talk about it, everybody knows who was involved, so we got to be careful not to talk about kind of big calls. And When you get to the hospital, make sure you have your patient or a family representative sign saying that they have received the privacy policies for your service.